CEO found a little girl sitting alone in the blizzard. Mom said, "You're the only one who can help us." The snow was falling heavier than it had in years. Thick, wind-blown flurries blanketed the streets of a small Colorado town on Christmas Eve. The world was silent, the kind of silence that came when everything was frozen, forgotten. Damien Locke tightened his grip on the steering wheel as his luxury SUV crawled down an old, narrow road. His breath fogged the windshield despite the heater blowing steadily. He'd just left a holiday gala thrown in his honor, an event filled with champagne, glittering lights, and hollow praise from people who barely knew his story. But none of that mattered now. Tonight, he had come back for something else. A promise he'd made long ago. A promise no one else knew about. As he approached the crumbling entrance to a long-abandoned orphanage, a sharp ache stirred in his chest. The building had once been home to 100 forgotten children, including him. Then his headlights caught something. A small figure, still, curled up on the steps. He braked hard. The tires screeched against the frozen slush. Damien threw his door open and stepped into the cutting wind, his shoes crunching snow as he rushed forward. There, on the orphanage steps, sat a little girl, no more than 6. Her pink jacket clung to her tiny frame, soaked through. Her cheeks were flushed purple, her hair damp, eyes wide with cold and fear. "Hey, sweetheart." Damien dropped to his knees, yanking off his coat. "Are you okay?" The girl didn't answer at first. She shivered, then reached into her pocket and handed him a crumpled piece of paper, the corners torn and soaked. Her voice trembled. "My mom said, 'You're the only one who can help us.'" He stared at her, startled. Then he looked down at the paper. His name, Damien Locke, was written at the top. Beneath it, in smaller, messier handwriting, "Please trust her, even if she forgot how to trust herself." His throat tightened. "What's your name?" he asked softly, wrapping his coat around her. "Leah," she said. Something in him froze. "And your mom?" "Naomi. Naomi Blake." The words hit like a punch to the chest. Naomi, the girl who once stood between him and the world when they were kids, in this very building, the only one who believed in him, the one he'd sworn to protect. His voice barely came out. "Where is she, Leah?" Leah glanced down. "She's sick. She couldn't walk. She told me to wait here and find you." Damien didn't hesitate. He scooped her into his arms. "Can you show me where?" She nodded. He followed her through a broken entrance. The air inside was bitter and stale. The corridor, once lined with staff rooms, was coated in dust and silence. They moved carefully through the darkness. At the end of the hall, a flickering lantern revealed a figure lying on an old mattress. A woman, pale, lips cracked, wrapped in 2 thin layers, shivering, barely conscious. Naomi. He knelt beside her, staring. Her hair was still golden, though tangled. Her face, thinner now, was unmistakable. "Naomi," he breathed. He touched her forehead, burning with fever. Quickly, he pulled the blanket from the corner, covering her, and reached for his phone. "Female, unconscious, severe cold exposure, Ridgeway Orphanage, send help, now." His voice was calm, but his chest was tight. He stayed beside her, his hand resting on hers. Behind him, Leah stood near the doorway, holding onto the wall, silent. The sirens began to echo faintly outside. Damien looked at Naomi's face again, and in that moment, everything came back. The broken windows of the old orphanage, the nights without heat, the day he carved a bracelet for her, scratched with the words, "For you, always." The whispered promise under a blanket, "I'll protect you forever." And then the morning they pulled him away, no warning, no goodbye. Now she was here, broken but alive. He leaned closer and whispered, "I promised once, and I will keep that promise. I'm here now." Then he turned and took Leah's tiny hand. She looked up at him, really looked, and gave a small, quiet nod. And that was enough. Naomi lay still in the private hospital room, her skin pale against the crisp white sheets. The IV line in her arm pulsed steadily, a quiet reminder that time was still on their side, for now. Damien sat beside her, elbows on his knees, hands clasped tightly. He had barely blinked since they arrived. Doctors had come and gone, checking vitals, running tests, adjusting medications. This hospital, pristine, state-of-the-art, one of the best in Colorado, was partially his. But none of that mattered. Not when she was here. Not when it was her. Naomi Blake. The name echoed in his mind like the faint ringing of a long-forgotten bell. In the corner, Leah was curled up on a couch, now in warm pajamas, her arms wrapped around a stuffed bear a nurse had given her. She was already asleep, her breathing slow and even. Damien looked at her, then turned his gaze back to Naomi, to the girl who had once shielded him when the world was too cruel. He leaned his head back and let the memories drift in. It had been winter, just like this. The old orphanage had no real insulation. The snow leaked through cracks in the walls. He had been quiet, awkward, always a target. But Naomi had been fire. Blonde braids, scraped knees, and a voice that never backed down. She'd pulled bullies off him, dragged him to the nurse when he refused help, handed him her extra biscuit without asking. And in return, he had carved her a bracelet, a small loop of wood, rough and clumsy, with the words, "For you, always," etched with a dull knife. She wore it like it was treasure. One night, huddled under a shared blanket, he had whispered, "I'll protect you forever." But the next day, a family arrived. They packed his things and drove him away. No warning, no goodbye. Now, almost 20 years later, she was lying just inches from him, unconscious, fragile. And then, she stirred. Her fingers moved slightly. Eyelashes fluttered. Damien sat up straighter, breath caught. Naomi's eyes opened slowly, blinking at the soft ceiling light. Her gaze swept the room and landed on him. Her lips parted. "Damien!" Her voice was a rasp. "Damien Locke?" He nodded. "Yeah, it's me." She stared like she didn't believe it. "I thought I was dreaming." "You're not," he said gently. "You're safe." Tears welled in her eyes. "I waited for you," she whispered. "After you left. I waited for years." "I didn't know they were taking me," he said, guilt rising. "No one told me anything." Naomi gave a faint, tired smile. "That's how life goes. It never says goodbye." She looked down at her hands, skin rough, nails chipped and worn from years of work. Damien followed her eyes and saw it too, everything she'd endured. "I tried to be strong," she murmured. "I went through a few foster homes, aged out, got a job cleaning motels. Then I met someone, thought he'd be different. I got pregnant." She paused, her jaw tensing. "He left before Leah was even born, ran off with someone else." Damien's jaw tightened. "I worked non-stop," Naomi continued, her voice distant. "Cleaning houses, washing linens, anything that kept us fed. We moved constantly. Then I got sick. At first I thought it was stress, exhaustion. I ignored it, but it kept getting worse." She swallowed. "Some mornings I couldn't even stand. That's when I knew I had to do something." Her eyes met his. They were no longer the fierce eyes of a girl who never backed down, but they were still hers. "Leah saw your face in a magazine," she said quietly. She said, "He looks like someone who knows how to help. I wasn't sure if I had the right to reach out to you, but I wrote your name on that note. Just once, just in case." Damien couldn't find his voice. "I didn't plan to find you," Naomi said, a soft laugh catching in her throat. "I just had nowhere else left to go." Damien reached out and took her hand. It was cold, calloused, unfamiliar, and yet achingly known. "You were the only light in my darkest days," he said. "And now, you've been carrying that darkness all alone." Naomi's lips trembled. Her eyes closed, not in pain, Not from weariness, but as if, finally, she could rest. For the first time in years, Naomi Blake wasn't fighting the world by herself. Snow had started to fall harder by late afternoon, blanketing the hospital windows in a quiet gray. Naomi had been resting in the waiting area of the transitional care wing when suddenly, she doubled over, clutching her stomach in pain. The crash of a ceramic mug hitting the floor jolted Damien from across the room. He was at her side in an instant. "Naomi? Hey, stay with me," he said, kneeling beside her. She barely managed to breathe through clenched teeth. Her face was pale, slick with sweat. "Help!" Damien yelled, waving down a nurse. "We need a doctor, now." Within the hour, Naomi was rushed in for an emergency endoscopy. Damien paced the hallway, fists clenched, until the doctor emerged, holding a chart and wearing the expression no one wants to see. "It's gastric cancer," he said gently. "Late stage. But if we act quickly, with surgery and an aggressive treatment plan, we still have options." Damien swallowed hard. "Then we start today." Naomi didn't say much. When he entered her room later, she was staring out the window, arms wrapped around herself. "I don't want Leah to see me like this," she murmured without turning. "You're not alone in this," Damien said softly. She gave a dry, bitter smile. "Aren't I?" A few days later, he found her in the tiny kitchenette at the hospital. She was trying to pour oatmeal into a bowl, her hands trembling. "Let me help," Damien offered, moving toward her. "I've got it," she insisted, but as she turned, she stumbled, legs giving way. He caught her before she hit the floor. Her head rested against his chest, her breath shallow. "I'm not afraid of dying," she whispered, eyes glassy. "I'm afraid Leah won't remember me as strong." That night, Damien made a decision. The next morning, he drove Naomi and Leah to his mountain home, a secluded timber cabin nestled in the trees, far from the noise of the city. Snow lined the roof, and smoke curled gently from the chimney. Naomi blinked as they stepped inside. Medical equipment had been set up, warm blankets folded neatly on the couch. The fireplace crackled. It smelled like cedarwood and something safe. Damien looked at her. "You won't face this alone. Not again. Not this time." He hired a full private medical team, an oncologist, a dietitian, a physical therapist, even a counselor. Naomi tried to protest, but he simply said, "You've done enough. Let someone take care of you now." Later that week, while rummaging through an old box in the attic, Damien found a small wooden bracelet, worn, cracked, but still intact. His name was carved in tiny, uneven letters. He smiled. That night he sanded a new bracelet by hand, smaller and lighter. On it he carved a single word, Leah. The next morning, he knelt in front of the girl and slipped it gently onto her wrist. "What's this?" she asked, curious. "It's a promise," he said. "The first one I ever made, and the last one I will ever break." But peace never lasted long. One afternoon, his cousin Miles arrived at the cabin. Damien met him at the porch. "Family visit?" Damien asked flatly. "More like damage control," Miles replied, stepping inside uninvited. "You do realize this could cost you everything?" Damien folded his arms. "She's sick, Miles. She's dying, and you're the CEO of a Fortune 500 company playing house with a time bomb. If she dies here, you're headline news." Damien didn't flinch. "If protecting someone I once made a promise to is the story, then let it be told." Unbeknownst to either of them, Naomi had been standing just around the corner, hearing every word. That night, she packed a small bag, kissed Leah's forehead, and left a letter on the kitchen counter. "I'm not the woman you need in your future. I just wanted to leave something good behind for Leah, not be anyone's burden." When Damien found it, he didn't hesitate. The roads were slick with ice. His headlights cut through the snowfall as he sped toward the bus station 5 miles out of town. He burst into the terminal, eyes scanning. She sat in the back row, alone, holding Leah's bracelet in her hands. Damien walked over, sat beside her without a word, and gently pressed the old wooden bracelet into her palm. "You're not a burden," he said quietly. "You're the reason I became who I am." Naomi didn't speak, but her fingers closed around the bracelet, and one silent tear slid down her cheek, not from fear, not from sorrow, but something softer. She reached for his hand. This time, she did not let go. The photo hit the internet by morning. Damien, stepping out of a clinic with Leah in his arms, Naomi following closely behind, pale, visibly tired, bundled in a coat that looked a size too thin for the Colorado winter. The headline read, "Insurance CEO caring for sick ex and her child. Sources say he's abandoning his role for personal matters." The stock took a small dip. By noon, the board had called for an emergency meeting. Damien stood at the head of a sleek conference room lined with polished glass and silent judgment. One of the older board members cleared his throat. "Damien," he began, "the optics of this are complicated. The media's not going to be kind. It may be best, for now, that you step back from being the face of the company." Another chimed in, "Just until this passes. Let the PR team handle the fallout. We can't risk long-term damage to investor confidence." Damien looked at each of them, calm, still. Then, he opened his leather folder and placed a thick file on the table. "I built this company from the ground up," he said, voice even but resolute. "Not to impress investors, not for image, but because no one would insure my mother when she got sick. I swore no one else would be left out like she was." He straightened, gaze unwavering. "If protecting someone I once made a promise to costs me this seat, so be it. I'll leave this office before I leave her." The room fell into stunned silence. Naomi found out later that evening. She had seen the headlines. She had seen the comments, the speculation, the whispers about how she was using him. She sat alone at the kitchen table, holding a mug of tea she had not touched. Damien came in quietly, placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "I never meant for you to." "You are not the cause," he interrupted, crouching beside her. "You are the reason, and I have never regretted that reason. Not for a second." Naomi's eyes welled, but she nodded, just once, as if finally letting herself believe it. That weekend, Damien didn't call a press conference. He went live from his personal account. No notes, no PR script. "I was raised in a state-run orphanage," he began, the camera steady on his face. "I had no family. I had no name that meant anything. Until I met a girl named Naomi. She was the first person to ever call me her friend." He talked about the nights they stayed up sharing hopes, about the snowstorm when she gave him her only blanket, about the day he left without saying goodbye, and how he never stopped thinking about her. "And now," he said, voice thickening, "years later, life brought her back to me, not by coincidence, by purpose. Because if I walked away from her now, I'd be no different from the world that walked away from me." He ended simply, "This is not about business. It's about who I choose to be." By morning, the video had gone viral. Thousands of comments poured in, some skeptical, but most deeply moved. A cancer survivor wrote, "If my insurer had half the heart this man does, I wouldn't have lost my house." A mother posted, "He reminded me that love doesn't ruin reputations, it rebuilds them." Former policyholders began sharing their own stories about how Damien's firm had supported them in the worst of times. At home, Naomi scrolled through the comments in silence. Then one message caught her eye. It read, "The world isn't judging me. They're seeing me through your eyes." She looked up as Damien entered the room, setting down a tray of hot soup and crackers beside her. He took her hand without a word. "That's how I've always seen you," he said. This time, Naomi didn't look away. And for the first time in weeks, she smiled, not out of hope, but because, somehow, she finally felt seen. The hospital room was quiet. save for the low hum of machines and the soft beeping of Naomi's monitor. After weeks of treatment, the doctors had finally made their recommendation: a minimally invasive surgery to remove the damaged part of her stomach. The prognosis was optimistic, but the risks were still there. Naomi sat by the window, looking out at the snowy trees swaying beyond the glass. Her hands were folded on her lap, fingers slightly trembling. "If anything happens to me," she said quietly, eyes still on the snow, "Leah will have lost both her parents. She has no one else." Damien knelt beside her, his eyes steady. "She has me, and she always will." Naomi turned to him slowly, pain and fear etched deep in her face. "What if I don't wake up?" Damien reached for her hand and held it gently. "Even if you forget who I was," he said softly, "I'll never forget who you are." That night, Damien stayed in the hospital with Leah. The little girl curled up next to him on the couch in the waiting room, her stuffed bunny in one arm, a blanket pulled over her shoulders. He read from one of her picture books, voice low and even. At the end of the story, Leah looked up at him with wide eyes. "Will Mommy be okay?" Damien kissed her forehead. "Your mommy is the bravest girl I've ever known," he said, "and brave girls always come back." Elsewhere in her room, Naomi sat with pen and paper. She had asked for a few minutes alone, and the nurse had nodded with quiet understanding. She wrote slowly, the words careful and deliberate. It wasn't a goodbye letter, not exactly, but something to leave behind in case she couldn't say the things she needed to say. "Damien, thank you for keeping the promise you made when we were just kids. Even when I forgot it, even when I forgot you, you remembered me. If this is goodbye, I want you to know, you were always my safe place." She folded the letter, slipped it into an envelope, and left it on the bedside table. The next morning, she was wheeled into surgery. Damien stood outside the operating room, watching through the glass until the doors shut behind her. Then he sat down with Leah in his lap, arms around her protectively. 4 hours passed. Neither of them moved. When the surgeon finally stepped out, face tired but calm, Damien shot to his feet. "She's stable," the doctor said. "The surgery went well. She's going to be fine." Damien exhaled like he hadn't breathed in hours. Later, in the recovery room, Naomi stirred beneath the warm light of afternoon. Her eyes fluttered open. She blinked up at the ceiling, then slowly turned her head to the side. There, on the nightstand, hung the small wooden bracelet, the one she had carved from scrap wood all those years ago. Damien was sitting next to her, still holding her hand, dark circles under his eyes but a quiet peace in his expression. Naomi's lips curled into the faintest smile. "You kept your promise," she whispered. Damien leaned closer, brushing her hair back from her forehead. "This time," he said softly, "I'll never let go." Weeks passed. Naomi's strength began to return. Her cheeks regained color. Her steps grew steadier. Her laughter came easier. When she was finally discharged, Damien drove her and Leah home, not to the city, but back to the cabin in the woods. There, on a quiet Sunday morning, Damien took out a nail and gently fastened 3 wooden bracelets, Naomi's, his, and Leah's, onto the front door frame. The wind rustled through the trees as the soft winter sun filtered through the pines. The bracelets swayed slightly in the breeze, like a whisper of something sacred. A circle, now unbroken. A vow kept, not just in words, but in love that had survived storm after storm. And finally, in the quiet peace of that morning, the home they had never dared to imagine began to feel real. The cabin near the forest stood quiet, blanketed in the soft hush of early spring snowmelt. Morning light filtered through the pine trees, casting golden streaks across the wooden porch where Naomi sat with a book in her lap. Her blonde hair spilled over her shoulder in loose waves, catching the sunlight like threads of gold. For the first time in years, her face held a calm that was not borrowed from hope, but built from healing. After weeks of careful monitoring and gentle recovery, she had been officially discharged. Damien had brought her and Leah home, not to a city apartment, not to a hospital suite, but to the small wooden cabin he had once built for solitude. Now, it had become something else entirely. Naomi's days grew into gentle rhythms. Each morning, she'd sip tea on the porch while Leah played nearby. Her body was still regaining strength, but the color had returned to her cheeks, and her eyes no longer carried the shadows of silent pain. Inside the house, small changes took place without fuss. Damien, as always, worked quietly. He installed a new heating system so the floors would stay warm for Naomi's feet. He fixed the loose panel on the back deck and re-shingled the roof over the porch before the rains arrived. He never mentioned it, but Naomi noticed. One morning, she found a small note slipped between the pages of her book on the dining table, her handwriting, soft and steady. "I see everything, even the quiet parts, especially those." He smiled when he read it. Leah, now fully adjusted to their new home, had started preschool nearby. She came home each day with stories about classmates, snacks, and the funny things her teacher said. One afternoon, Naomi overheard her speaking to a friend on a video call. "This is my house," Leah said proudly, spinning the camera. "And that's Uncle D. He's my second favorite grown-up. After Mommy, of course." Naomi had laughed, quietly wiping at the corner of her eye. She never asked why Leah had started calling Damien Uncle D. She never needed to. There was a comfort in it, a closeness that needed no labels, no blood, just presence. Late one afternoon, with the soft light dimming through the windows, Damien walked into the living room and found Naomi fast asleep on the couch. A half-folded pile of Leah's laundry sat beside her, a sock still clutched loosely in her hand. He moved quietly, grabbing the knit throw blanket from the armrest and tucking it gently over her. As he turned to leave, her hand reached out in her sleep, blindly, instinctively, and caught his. She didn't wake, but her fingers closed gently around his. Damien didn't move. He just looked down at her, at the way her brow softened, her breathing even and deep. He lowered himself quietly to the edge of the couch, letting her hand rest in his. They said nothing. They didn't need to. In the days that followed, something shifted. Not spoken, not declared, but lived. Their eyes lingered longer. Their silences grew softer, not strained but full of things understood. The storm had passed, but its echo remained, not in the form of pain, but in the way survivors know how to hold on tighter to every quiet moment they're given. And in that stillness, between the rising sun and the warmth of tea, between small chores and the laughter of a little girl dancing in a pink dress, a family began to grow, one not bound by perfect timing or tradition, but by trust rebuilt one breath at a time. The kind of peace that comes not after the storm, but because they had walked through it together. The gymnasium was filled with the cheerful buzz of parents and spring decorations, paper flowers, pastel streamers, and little painted eggs hanging from the ceiling. At the center of it all stood the stage, where a group of preschoolers lined up, fidgeting with excitement and bows in their hair. From the front row, Damien watched as Leah stepped forward. She wore a soft pink dress, her hair braided neatly with matching ribbons, cheeks rosy, with nervous energy. Naomi had helped her rehearse the little dance for weeks, twirling, hopping, and bowing at just the right moment. As the music started, Damien leaned forward, heart thudding, not from business deals or quarterly reports, but from the overwhelming tenderness of the moment. He had attended galas, led boardrooms, stood in front of cameras, but this was the first time he felt like he was truly part of something that mattered, something that felt like home. Leah danced with complete focus, glancing once toward the front row. When she spotted him smiling, she grinned and forgot her next step, then giggled and caught up without missing a beat. The audience clapped as the performance ended, and the children bowed, waving proudly to the crowd. After the show, Naomi walked with Damien through the schoolyard, Leah skipping ahead to her classroom to grab her backpack. She was amazing. Damien said quietly, still carrying the warmth of the moment in his chest. "She gets it from me," Naomi replied with a smirk, then softened. "Thank you for being here. For her." Before he could respond, Leah came running back, slightly breathless, clutching a folded piece of paper in her hand. "I made something for you," she said, holding it out. Damien knelt and took the drawing carefully. It was crayon on construction paper, a little house in the woods, drawn with blocky charm. In front of it stood 3 stick figures, all holding hands, a tall man, a blonde woman with a long yellow braid, and a little girl in a pink dress. Above their heads floated a big heart, colored in with brown crayon, the same shade as the wooden bracelet Naomi had once made him, the same one he now wore on his wrist every day. "Mommy said," Leah whispered, leaning close, "when I'm really, really brave, I can give you this." Damien's throat tightened. "This is beautiful, Leah. Thank you." He turned to Naomi, holding the picture up slightly, his voice low. "Did you tell her to draw this?" Naomi shook her head gently, her smile bittersweet. "No. I think her heart just remembers what we forgot." There was no answer to that. Only the silence between 2 people who had walked through fire and found each other again, not because they were trying, but because they were ready. As they left the school, the sun filtered through the tall trees lining the parking lot. Damien reached out and took Leah's hand, her tiny fingers curling around his instinctively. Naomi walked beside them, her shoulder brushing his every now and then. No one spoke. There was no declaration, no grand moment, just the sound of footsteps on gravel, the rustle of wind through new leaves, and a little girl humming to herself in between them. The winter had ended, and with every quiet step forward, a new season began, one not made of promises, but of presence. The old orphanage stood quiet beneath the early winter sky, a fresh dusting of snow blanketing its roof. It had been cleaned and swept, its long-abandoned classroom turned into something tender, almost sacred. Wooden benches lined the walls, fairy lights draped across cracked windows, and in the center, a single wreath made of 3 wooden bracelets hung from the window latch, one for each of them. No cameras, no designer gowns. Just people who mattered, 2 nurses who had cared for Naomi, a retired teacher from the shelter, and a few bright-eyed children Naomi now tutored at the community center Damien quietly funded. Naomi stood near the front, her simple white dress flowing like a whisper. Her blonde hair, loosely curled, fell down her shoulders, a single white flower tucked behind one ear. She looked peaceful, luminous, as though all the storms had finally passed through her and left her whole. At the back of the room, Leah adjusted the hem of her pink dress, gripping her little flower basket with both hands. She looked up at Damien. "Ready, Uncle D?" she asked, her eyes wide. He smiled, crouching to her level. "You've got the most important job today." Leah giggled, then walked down the aisle, scattering petals from her small hand. Naomi's gaze followed her daughter, misty with emotion, and then landed on Damien. He stepped forward, wearing no tie, just a dark jacket and the bracelet on his wrist. When he reached Naomi, he didn't speak right away. He looked at her like she was the answer to a question he had carried for too many years. Taking her hands, he finally said, "I thought I lost everything in that blizzard years ago, but maybe it just took a storm to lead me back to where I always belonged. I promised to protect you once, and I promise again, this time, not as a boy, but as the man who will never let go of what matters most." Naomi blinked back tears, smiling as she whispered, "I never stopped hoping." Leah slipped her tiny hand into theirs, and Damien reached down, lifting her up so all 3 of them stood in one embrace, framed in the soft light of a place that had once held nothing but hard memories, and now, something better. Outside, snow began to fall gently. Later that evening, the 3 of them returned to the little cabin in the woods. The fire crackled in the hearth, the smell of warm cocoa drifted from the kitchen, and Leah danced barefoot in her pajamas, still humming the tune from her spring recital. Naomi curled into the corner of the couch, wrapped in a blanket, watching Damien hang the wooden bracelets back above the doorframe. Leah stood on a stool beside him, raising her bracelet high. "We're a circle now," she said proudly. "That means forever, right?" Damien looked down at her, then at Naomi. "Yes, sweet girl," he replied softly. "Forever began the moment you knocked on my door, and for the first time in a long time, there was nothing left to fix, only life to live, together. If this story moved you, if you felt something stir deep within as Damien kept his promise and Naomi found her way home again, then don't let it end here. Tap subscribe to stay with us for more powerful emotional journeys like this one. And don't forget to hit the hype button to support soul-stirring stories, where every story is a reminder that love, healing, and hope always find a way back. Thank you for watching. We'll see you in the next story.